Since June 6, 1944, rain fell through thick clouds. But the rumble above wasn't thunder. It was bombers, hundreds of them. I still remember that morning, the damp air mixing with the sharp smell of fuel and iron. Our Tiger tanks, massive and proud, stood in a muddy field outside Caen. We believed we were unstoppable. The Führer himself had said the Tigers would crush any Allied armor that dared approach Normandy. But before we even saw the enemy, the sky itself turned against us. I was a loader in one of the Tigers of the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion. We had orders to move toward the front once the invasion began. We'd been waiting for weeks, listening to distant artillery, confident that once we reached the line, the Allies would learn fear again. Our commander, Oberfeldwebel Kruger, told us to stay ready. The British and Americans, he said, might have numbers, but we had the Tigers. At dawn, we heard a deep, growing roar, not from the ground, but from above. Someone shouted, "Flieger alarm!" and we ran for cover. The first explosions landed a few hundred meters away, sending dirt, shrapnel, and tank parts flying. The ground shook like an earthquake. I remember diving into a trench, feeling the earth rain down on my back. When I looked up, I saw waves of Allied bombers crossing the sky in perfect formation, dropping rows of destruction that swallowed everything below. Our Tiger, Elsa, was hit by a near miss. The shockwave ripped open one of her side panels, and flames burst from the engine deck. Kruger screamed for us to get out. I saw our radio operator crawl through smoke, his face blackened, his hands shaking. The fuel ignited seconds later, and the tank that had taken months to build and countless men to assemble was gone in one violent moment. Around me, other Tigers were burning too. Giant metal beasts dying before they ever roared. One tried to move, its treads half buried in a crater, its turret turning slowly as if blind. Then another explosion tore through its hull, throwing the commander clear. He didn't move again. We were helpless. No Luftwaffe came. No anti-aircraft guns reached the bombers. We watched as our strength, the pride of Germany, was erased in minutes by the sky we couldn't fight. When the dust settled, what remained of our battalion was silence. The survivors wandered through smoke and twisted steel, calling names that never answered. Out of more than a dozen Tigers, only 3 were still capable of moving. And even they were damaged. I remember sitting beside the wreck of Elsa that evening, staring at her blackened armor. I could still see the white cross faintly under the soot. I thought about how we'd never even seen the enemy. Not one British tank, not one American soldier. We were supposed to defend Normandy. Instead, we were buried there. In the distance, we heard the sound of naval guns from the beaches. The invasion had begun, and we, the ones meant to stop it, were already finished. Years later, when I tell this story, people ask me what it felt like. I tell them it wasn't fear, it was disbelief. To realize that all the strength we'd built, all the pride of German engineering, could be undone before we even fired a single shell. That day, I learned the war had changed. Power no longer came from armor or guns. It came from the sky. Smoke still clung to the horizon, thick and oily. The wrecks of our Tigers smoldered behind us as we trudged down the ruined road toward Caen. The few survivors of our battalion, what had once been proud tank crews, were now a broken column of men on foot. The air smelled of fuel, earth, and death. Every few minutes, we could still hear the distant hum of aircraft. It made us flinch every time. Oberfeldwebel Kruger led what was left of us. His face was covered in grime, his uniform torn, but his voice still carried command. "We regroup in Caen," he said. "We'll find fuel, spare parts, maybe a working Tiger." But deep down, everyone knew there was nothing left to regroup. As we passed the fields, we saw what the bombers had done. Tigers lay upside down, their armor peeled open like tin cans. Cows and horses lay dead beside them, victims of the same fire. Even the earth looked wounded, blackened craters stretching for miles. At a crossroads, we met a small unit of Panzer Grenadiers retreating from the beaches. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with exhaustion. One of them shouted, "The beaches are lost! The Americans have tanks ashore. Shermans, hundreds of them." Kruger clenched his jaw. "If we had our Tigers," he muttered, "we could have held them." A young soldier beside me whispered, "If we had the sky, we could have stopped them." By midday, we reached the outskirts of Caen. What had once been a quiet French town was now a maze of rubble and panic. German trucks burned in the streets. A lone anti-aircraft gun fired at shadows, its operator half-deaf from the constant shelling. We found a small repair depot, or what was left of it. Mechanics were hauling crates of ammunition, shouting orders, but the sight of us, soot-streaked tankers without tanks, made them pause. "Where's your unit?" one asked. Kruger answered coldly, "Buried west of Villers-Bocage, under the RAF." They said nothing after that. Everyone understood. The sky was now the enemy we could never touch. That night, we slept in a ruined barn. The ground trembled with distant bombing. I couldn't close my eyes. Every sound made my heart jump. I kept seeing Elsa, our tiger, burning. Her cannon pointed uselessly at the clouds. Around midnight, Kruger woke us. "Orders from headquarters," he said. "We're to fall back east of Caen. The Allies have broken through the coastal defenses." We gathered what little we had. Rifles, a few grenades, no tank. As we moved out, the horizon flickered orange from fires burning along the front. Suddenly, we heard it again. That low, dreadful rumble from above. Someone shouted, "Bombers!" and we scattered for cover. The night erupted in chaos. Explosions ripped through the fields around us. The shockwaves tossed us like leaves. I hit the ground, covering my head, as burning debris rained down. When it ended, there was only the hiss of flames and the groan of the wounded. We'd lost more men. One of the survivors, a young gunner named Meyer, sat trembling beside a crater. "We don't even see them," he whispered. "They kill us before we fight." Kruger said nothing. He just looked at the sky, his eyes hollow. At dawn, we finally reached a small German outpost east of Caen. The officer there stared at our scorched uniforms and said, "Your tankers?" "Yes," Kruger replied. "Without tanks," the officer sighed and pointed toward a wrecked rail yard. "You'll find your replacements there. What's left of them?" We went to see. There were 2 Tigers on flatbeds, both damaged during transport. One had a cracked turret. The other had no engine. Mechanics were scavenging parts like vultures. Kruger turned to us. "We rebuild," he said quietly, "even if it kills us." And we did. Through hunger, fear, and exhaustion, we began piecing together what little remained. The sound of tools echoed through the ruined depot as Allied bombers continued to haunt the sky above us. We weren't fighting the enemy anymore. We were fighting time, destruction, and the sky itself. But deep inside every one of us, something stubborn burned. A soldier's refusal to vanish. Because even when the world was falling apart, we still believed we could rise again in steel. The morning began with the smell of diesel and ashes. We had managed to rebuild 1 Tiger from the wreckage of 3. A Frankenstein machine with mismatched panels, scorched paint, and a growl that shook the barn walls. Kruger named her Brunhilde. To us, she was more than steel. She was hope, forged from ruin. When we finally turned her engine over, the roar echoed through the valley. Every man nearby stopped to listen. It wasn't victory, but it was defiance. "Mount up," Kruger ordered. "We're going to the front." We rolled down the dirt road toward Caen. the morning sun glinting weakly through a haze of smoke. Villages we passed were hollow shells, roofs torn open, walls riddled with shrapnel. Civilians stared from cellars as our Tiger crawled past, its treads grinding over broken glass. Halfway there, a Panzer Grenadier column flagged us down. Their commander leaned into our hatch. "Don't go further," he warned. "The road's death." "Jabos are hunting anything that moves," Kruger smirked. "We'll take our chances. A tiger isn't easy to kill." But he was wrong. An hour later, we reached an open field, and the sky betrayed us again. The first aircraft appeared as tiny dots above the clouds. Then came the shriek of diving engines, P-47s. Someone shouted. We fired our machine gun into the air, hopelessly. The first rocket hit 50 meters away, throwing dirt across the hull. The second hit closer. The entire Tiger rocked as if struck by a hammer from God. Inside, everything rattled. Bolts, shells, our bones. Kruger's voice roared over the intercom. "Reverse! Reverse!" But it was too late. The field was open, no cover, no trees. The Thunderbolts circled back. Their guns opened, and tracer fire tore into the side armor. Sparks danced like fireflies. The periscope shattered. The loader beside me screamed, his arm cut by flying metal. "Get out!" Kruger yelled. We burst from the hatch and ran for a ditch. The Tiger behind us burned, its ammunition cooking off in a deafening chain of explosions. Flames climbed into the sky. I looked back once. Brunhilde was still moving, her turret turning slowly toward the heavens, as if she wanted to fight the gods themselves. Then a final rocket slammed into her rear deck. She vanished in fire. The ground shook. Smoke rolled over us like a living thing. I could taste gunpowder on my tongue, bitter and hot. When the attack ended, silence felt worse than the noise. We lay in the ditch for minutes that felt like hours. The only sounds were crackling fire and the distant thunder of naval guns. Kruger's face was streaked with soot, his eyes red but unbroken. "They control the sky," he said softly. "Every battle begins there now." We joined what was left of the Panzer Grenadiers retreating through Caen's outskirts. The roads were jammed with burning trucks, wounded soldiers, and frightened horses. Every few minutes, the rumble above sent everyone diving for cover again. In a half-destroyed cafe, we found a radio still working. The operator was trembling as he read the reports. "Americans, British. They've broken through at several points. Caen is surrounded." Kruger slammed his fist on the table. "All this steel, all this blood, for nothing." I didn't answer. I just stared out the window, watching smoke rise where our Tigers had once stood proud. That night, under a shattered moon, I wrote in my pocket journal, the same one I keep to this day. We were promised that our Tigers would decide the war. But in Normandy, it wasn't the tanks that decided anything. It was the sky, and the sky belonged to the enemy. As dawn crept over the ruins, Kruger gathered the few of us who remained. "We'll keep fighting," he said quietly. "Not for Berlin, for the men we lost." And so we did. Rifles instead of tanks, trenches instead of armor. But every time I heard engines overhead, I remembered the roar of Brunhilde, and the day the sky burned our pride to ashes. The city was burning when we reached it. Flames rose from the rooftops, painting the night sky red and black. The cobblestone streets were littered with broken rifles, shattered helmets, and the bodies of men who'd fought to hold the ruins. Somewhere, a church bell rang once, cracked and hollow, before collapsing in on itself. We were a handful of survivors now, not soldiers, just ghosts walking through smoke. The British had entered the outskirts. Every alley echoed with gunfire. We could hear the clank of Sherman tanks moving closer, their engines low and steady, like drums of doom. Oberfeldwebel Kruger crouched beside a fallen wall, binoculars pressed to his eyes. "They're advancing from the west," he said. Infantry in front, armor behind. If we stay here, we die. But where do we go? I asked. He didn't answer. There was nowhere left to go. We dug in among the rubble, 3 machine guns, a few rifles, and what little ammunition we had scavenged. The smell of cordite and smoke mixed with the sickly sweetness of burning flesh. Above us, the whine of aircraft returned. Everyone froze. Down! Kruger shouted. The bombs fell again, tearing through the city that had already been destroyed a dozen times over. Walls collapsed around us. Dust filled our lungs. When the roar faded, Khan was nothing but rubble and fire. But then we heard it. Voices, English ones, shouting commands. The enemy was coming. We opened fire from the shadows. Our MG-42 screamed across the ruins, cutting through the first wave of infantry. The British scattered, diving for cover. I reloaded, my hands trembling, sweat mixing with grime. Each shot echoed like thunder in the hollow streets. A Sherman appeared through the smoke, its gun turning toward us. The muzzle flash lit the alley, and the shell hit just meters away. The blast threw me against a wall. My ears rang. I couldn't hear anything but a dull roar. When I looked up, 2 of our men were gone, replaced by a crater of dust and blood. Kruger crawled toward me, his helmet dented, eyes wide with rage. "Fall back!" he yelled. "To the church!" We ran through alleys choked with fire and debris. Bullets zipped past. Every explosion felt closer. At the church, we found what was left of another German unit. Maybe 10 men. One had a Panzerfaust. "Wait for it," Kruger said, peering through a crack in the wall. The Sherman turned the corner. Its gun was still searching for us. The man with the Panzerfaust rose, aimed, and fired. The rocket struck the tank squarely on its side. A burst of flame erupted, and the Sherman stopped dead. The explosion lit up the street like daylight. For one fleeting moment, we cheered. Then the aircraft returned. Rockets screamed down from the sky. The church roof shattered. Fire rained through the pews. The blast threw me to the floor. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't move. Dust filled my mouth. I could barely breathe. When the bombing stopped, everything was silent except for the crackle of flames. The roof was gone. Half the men were gone too. Kruger crawled to me, coughing blood. "We're finished," he whispered. "This isn't war anymore. It's slaughter." Outside, I heard tanks rumbling again. Steady, confident, the sound of a victorious army moving through ruins. I dragged myself to the doorway and looked out. British soldiers were advancing carefully, their silhouettes framed by fire. One of them spotted me, a young man, maybe 20. He raised his rifle but hesitated. For a moment, our eyes met. I dropped my weapon. There was nothing left to fight for. He lowered his gun slowly and motioned for me to move. I stepped out, hands raised. Behind me, the city of Caen burned like the end of the world. That was the last day I fought in Normandy. The last day I saw Kruger alive. In the years after, when I looked back on it all, I realized something. We never truly fought the Allies in Normandy. We fought the sky, the bombs, and the hopelessness that came from knowing our power meant nothing. The Tigers had been our pride. But pride dies easily when the heavens themselves fall against you. The world after capture was quiet, unnervingly quiet. No engines, no shouting officers, no smell of fuel or gun oil. Only the hum of flies over the wreckage and the slow, endless shuffle of boots in the mud. We were prisoners now, ghosts of an army that no longer existed. They herded us along a dirt road lined with smoking vehicles. The sky was blue for the first time in days, but it felt like a cruel joke. I could still hear the ringing in my ears from the bombing, and every shadow made me flinch. Around us, British soldiers moved with calm precision, efficient, disciplined, and far younger than I had expected. Some couldn't have been more than 20. One of them, a tall, red-haired corporal, offered me a canteen. I hesitated, unsure. He nodded once and said softly, "Drink." I took it. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it might as well have been gold. For a brief moment, I remembered the training camps back home, the speeches, the flags, all the talk of glory. But here, in the mud of Normandy, glory had died along with everything else. We passed through what was left of our own lines. Burned half-tracks, shredded uniforms, and blackened tigers lay like corpses of an extinct species. A British sergeant walking beside us muttered, "Bloody hell! Look what the RAF did to them." His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. When night came, they gathered us in a makeshift camp near the ruins of a farmhouse. There was no barbed wire yet, just armed guards and exhaustion. We collapsed wherever we could find space. I lay on the ground, staring at the stars, those same stars we used to navigate the skies when our own Luftwaffe still ruled above. Now they felt distant, indifferent. Beside me, a wounded soldier named Meyer whispered, "Do you think Berlin knows what happened?" I shook my head. "They'll call it a temporary setback." He gave a weak laugh. "We were supposed to be invincible." In the distance, we heard the rumble of trucks bringing more prisoners. Dozens, then hundreds. The mighty German army reduced to a column of tired men, marching under the same sky that had destroyed us. The next morning, they brought us bread and tea, the first real food in days. The same red-haired corporal handed me a small tin mug. He looked at the iron cross still pinned to my torn jacket and said quietly, "You fought hard." I didn't answer. Hard didn't matter when you'd already lost before you even began. Later that day, a British officer approached with a clipboard. He spoke German fluently, with a calm tone that unnerved me. "You were tank crew?" "Yes," I said. "Tiger Battalion, 503rd. He raised an eyebrow. "We've seen your Tigers. Impressive machines. Shame about the air cover." I looked up at him. "We never saw your tanks," I said. "Only your planes." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "That's how the world works now. Wars are won from above." Those words stayed with me for years. Days passed. We were moved north toward the coast, toward a camp filled with thousands of other prisoners. Men who'd once believed they were unstoppable. Some talked about escaping. Most just stared at nothing. The war had ended for us, but it still raged beyond the wire. We could hear it every night. The thunder of artillery, the distant growl of aircraft, the sound of history being rewritten. One evening, as the guards counted us, I saw the red-haired corporal again. He was laughing with another soldier, a cigarette between his fingers. For a strange moment, I felt envy. He was young, alive, free of the weight that crushed us. I realized then that the war hadn't just destroyed our tanks. It had destroyed our illusions. We had believed we were the future, but the future belonged to men like him. Years later, when I was released and returned to a broken Germany, I found myself standing in front of a scrapyard where an old Tiger turret lay rusting in the grass. I placed my hand on its cold steel and remembered the friends who had burned inside them, the cities we destroyed, and the sky that destroyed us in return. I thought of Kruger, of Meyer, of Brunhilde roaring one last time, and I whispered the same words I'd written in my journal that night in Caen. We never reached the front. The war came for us first. A year after the war ended, the sound of engines still haunted my dreams. I would wake in the dark, gasping, expecting to hear bombs. But it was only rain against the broken windows. The war had followed me home. Germany was unrecognizable. The cities looked like our tanks, gutted shells of what once was. Buildings stood half-buried under their own rubble. Children played in craters where houses used to be. The proud banners, the parades, the speeches, all gone, replaced by hunger and silence. When I returned to Hamburg, no one recognized me. My uniform was long gone, replaced with the plain rags of a prisoner who had seen too much. I found my mother's house reduced to a single wall and a cellar. She had died in 1945, they said, during the last bombing. There was nothing left but a cracked photograph and her wedding ring. I found work clearing debris from the docks. Every morning, I joined lines of men who used to be soldiers, officers, tank crews, all now laborers with empty eyes. No one spoke of what they had done. The silence was heavy. We worked under the watch of British officers, the same calm faces that had captured us in Normandy. One day, while unloading steel from a wrecked ship, I saw something that froze me. Resting among the twisted metal was a tank turret. Rusted, burned, but unmistakable. A tiger. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. The smell of oil brought everything back. Elsa, Brunhilde, the fields outside Caen, Kruger's last order. I ran my hand over the scorched surface. It was cold and lifeless. The might that once made us proud now sat among the trash, forgotten. A British officer supervising the dock noticed me. He walked over, hands behind his back. "You recognize that, don't you?" he said. I nodded. Yes, it was one of ours. He studied me for a moment, then said quietly, "You're lucky to have survived it." I almost laughed. "Lucky?" I asked. "I left my friends burning inside these." He didn't reply. He simply nodded once and walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the water, watching the black waves hit the shore. Across the harbor, the Allied ships were being loaded with supplies, food, medicine, rebuilding materials. I realized then that the same nations who had destroyed us were now the ones helping us stand again. For the first time, I felt something strange. Not hatred, not pride, but acceptance. The war had ended, and all that was left was the question of what came next. I began to write. Not propaganda, not excuses, just memories of men who believed they were invincible, of machines that turned to ash before ever firing, of a sky that punished arrogance. I wanted others to know what it felt like when the ground burned beneath your boots, and you realized you were fighting ghosts. Months later, an American journalist came through the docks, interviewing former soldiers. He asked me to tell my story. I told him about Normandy, about Brunhilde, about how we never even reached the front. When he finished taking notes, he said, "You sound like a man who doesn't hate anymore." I looked out at the gray sea. "No," I said. "I just understand now. Hate builds tanks, but it doesn't win wars. It only buries them." He smiled sadly. "That's a lesson the world keeps forgetting." Years passed. I married a nurse who had lost her brother on the Eastern Front. We never talked about the war, but sometimes, when airplanes flew overhead, we both went silent. Even now, as an old man, I still dream of the sky, the one we feared, the one that decided everything. I see Brunhilde again, roaring defiantly one last time before the bombs fall. And every morning when I wake, I whisper the same words I've carried all my life. We never reached the front, but maybe that was mercy. The years had worn me down, but they had not erased the sound of that engine. Even after a decade, I could still hear it. The deep, metallic growl of a Maybach HL-230, the heart of the Tiger tank. When the letter came from the War Museum in England, I almost didn't go. They had written to former German veterans, inviting us to attend the unveiling of a restored Tiger captured in Normandy. I hesitated for days, but something inside me needed to see it, not out of pride, but closure. The ferry to England was quiet. Most passengers were businessmen or tourists. No one knew the old man sitting near the window had once fought beneath the same sky that destroyed his world. When I arrived at Bovington Camp, the museum was filled with the hum of conversation. Veterans, engineers, historians, British soldiers in crisp uniforms guided guests through exhibits. There were Shermans, Churchills, half-tracks, machines that had once hunted us. And then I saw it. The Tiger stood under a glass roof, gleaming under spotlights. Restored, repainted, reborn. Its dark gray armor shone like a monument to a time the world wanted to forget. But for me, it was like staring into a mirror that showed everything I'd lost. The curator, a polite Englishman with silver hair, noticed me standing there. "Magnificent, isn't she?" he said. Tiger 131, captured near Tunis, fully operational again. I nodded slowly. My throat tightened. "They always were magnificent," I whispered. He smiled, unaware of the storm behind my calm voice. "You served in one?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Two. Both destroyed before they ever reached the front." He seemed to hesitate, then asked softly, "Do you want to go inside?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I nodded. He opened the hatch and gestured for me to climb up. My knees trembled as I stepped onto the cold steel and lowered myself into the commander's seat. The smell hit me instantly. Oil, leather, iron. It was like stepping back into 1944. I ran my hand over the periscope housing, the same angle where shrapnel had once shattered the glass in Brunhilde. My fingers brushed the metal controls. I could almost hear Kruger's voice barking orders, the echo of shells, the roar of planes above. But here, there was only silence. The curator climbed up beside me. "It's strange," he said, "to think how much fear this machine caused, and how quickly the world moved on from it." I looked at him and replied, "It's not strange. The world always moves on. Only the men inside don't." He fell silent. When I climbed down, I stood before the Tiger one last time. A group of young cadets was gathered nearby, taking pictures. One of them noticed the old medal still pinned to my coat, the Iron Cross, faded and scratched. "Were you one of them?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, and we thought these beasts would make us gods." The boy frowned slightly. "What happened?" I looked up at the Tiger's long gun barrel, pointed harmlessly toward the museum wall. "The sky happened," I said, "and we learned we were only men." He didn't understand, not fully. But he nodded respectfully. That night, I walked outside the museum grounds. The air was cool, and the sky was clear. The same sky that had once rained fire. I looked up at it, older now, wiser, and somehow grateful. We had built monsters of steel, believing they would make us immortal. But the war taught me something else entirely. Power fades, machines rust, but memory endures. And sometimes, that's both the curse and the mercy. I took one last look at the Tiger under the glass dome before leaving. Its shadow stretched across the floor like a sleeping giant. "Rest," I whispered. "You've done enough killing." The summer sun hung low over the hills, bathing the countryside in gold. Wheat fields swayed in the warm wind, hiding the scars of war beneath new life. The villages were rebuilt, the roads smooth again. Children laughed where once there had been rubble and smoke, and in a small wooden house at the edge of a quiet valley, an old man sat by the window, staring at the horizon, the same horizon he had watched burn 2 decades ago. His name was Otto Reinhardt, once a tank gunner in the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion. Now, just a name in fading records, and an old soldier no one asked about anymore. On the table beside him lay a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with his handwriting, shaky but deliberate. It was his life's final work, a memoir not of glory, but of truth. The cover was plain, marked only with one title scrawled in pencil: "We never reached the front." Every morning he wrote a few more lines, his trembling hand steady only when the memories flowed. He wrote of Brunhilde and Elsa, of Kruger's defiance, of Kahn's ashes and the sound of bombers. He wrote of shame and forgiveness, of how the sky, not the ground, decided the war. And sometimes, when he grew tired, he would look out at the peaceful sky and whisper to himself, "No planes today." One afternoon, A car arrived from Munich. A young historian stepped out. Clean uniform, polished boots, the kind of confidence only peace can give. He introduced himself politely, saying he was collecting veterans' accounts for a book on the Normandy campaign. Otto invited him in. The young man asked eager questions about tactics, armor, and combat ranges. Otto answered patiently at first, but then shook his head. "You want numbers," he said quietly. "But war isn't numbers. It's sound, smell, fear. It's hearing a man scream for help and realizing you can't reach him." The historian hesitated. "Do you regret it?" Otto looked down at his hands. Scarred, veined, trembling, every day. But regret doesn't rebuild what we destroyed. It only keeps the dead alive in your head. The young man nodded slowly, realizing this wasn't the kind of story people told for medals or museums. That night, Otto sat on the porch watching the sun set over the hills. The world was calm again. A shepherd led his flock across the field, the bells around the sheep's necks ringing softly. For the first time in years, he smiled. He thought of Kruger, who had sworn they would fight to the last tank. He thought of Meyer, whose laughter still echoed faintly in his dreams. And he thought of that red-haired British corporal who had handed him water when no one else would. He realized then that mercy had survived, even when humanity hadn't. As dusk settled, he opened his notebook to the final page. His hand shook as he wrote the last words he would ever put to paper. "They told us the tigers would make us invincible, but in the end, it wasn't the steel that mattered. It was the men inside and the sky above. I used to think dying in battle was the greatest honor. Now I know. Living long enough to remember is both the punishment and the gift." He set down his pen, closed the book gently, and leaned back in his chair. The crickets sang outside, the sky glowing faintly with stars. His breathing slowed, calm and steady. When the morning came, the house was silent. The notebook lay open on the table, its final page fluttering in the breeze from the window. And there, beneath the words, someone, perhaps the young historian, later wrote a small note in pencil. Otto Reinhardt, 1919–1963. He never reached the front, but his story did.